Welcome to another episode of Safe Space, the podcast for next generation family business leaders. Today we're joined again by Dr. Sandra Primiano out of Montreal for episode number 2, the eagerly awaited episode number 2, where we talk about solutions and how to transform into who we want to become. So, Dr. Sandra, welcome back to the show. Before we get started, if you can maybe give the audience a bit of background on who you are, where you're based, why you do what you do, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the show, so to speak.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me back on again. So I'm a psychologist and a mental health leader, and I've spent a decade building different interventions, programs, and services for anxiety, for stress, for trauma, both in inpatient facilities and sort of outpatient therapy. And passionate about helping people on their wellness journeys and improving any issues that they want to work on.
So before we get started into the how to transform and how to change into who we want to become, you mentioned the word that really caught my ear that I want to, get into: trauma. When people think of trauma, what typically comes to mind is the big traumatic events. Divorces, sexual abuse, physical abuse, that sort of stuff. Can you talk about the sort of little traumas that end up becoming big traumatic effects over time for individuals? Just to
Yeah,
put
and
trauma into context.
Yeah, and it's a good point because it's not always about a huge event, right? And a significant traumatic event. It can be about certain behaviors or the way you're treated over time that ends up being traumatic, like being dismissed constantly, not being heard, not being validated, not being listened to, being cast aside. And it can be a series of those types of events and behaviors that can happen over time that can leave a scar, so to speak, emotionally, or that can cause some kind of trauma for an individual, like being ignored. Not having your needs met in any form can be traumatic for people, especially when it's an exposure over time and it's repeated. So anything that can have an aversive type of experience for you, whether it's those big significant types of events that you mentioned or repeated exposure to certain things that can be traumatic for us over time, can also cause uh, certain traumatic types of responses. And I think I like using the word trauma because it's not necessarily that somebody will always meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder, let's say for PTSD, but it can be that you have trauma symptoms, that you're triggered by certain situations, people, or things, that you're hypervigilant or overreactive or jittery at certain times and moments, that you have certain, like flashback types of thinking thoughts or images around certain events or things. So you might not meet necessarily a full diagnostic criteria, but it doesn't mean that you haven't experienced some form of trauma.
So when someone experiences over time a repeated behavior like being dismissed or unappreciated or unheard, they start to develop a certain type of personality, a certain way of being,
Right.
right? So, I've worked with a client where he has had a tendency to explode
Mm-hmm.
uh, emotionally when he doesn't feel that he's being valued or appreciated.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So
Yeah.
what kind of advice would you offer an individual such as as that person, for others listening? How can they transform this
Yeah.
learned behavior as a result of a lifetime of trauma
Mm-hmm.
that didn't appear to be trauma, but yet when we look at it is trauma?
Yeah, and that's a great example. I love that example because that's the trigger, right? So once you understand that and you realize that you've been invalidated or dismissed, let's say there's a pattern that repeated itself with your parents, for instance, you have that awareness, right? Which we talked about last time. So you know that this is happening. Then you've identified you have this explosive behavior. And so knowing this knowledge is key for you because you know you'll be triggered in these events. So once you see that this is happening and that kind of anger is building up inside of you, because it's not automatic, you will feel things. Your heart might race, you might get hot. Some people get hot, some people clench their jaw, some people make fists. So once you figure out what's happening in your body, right, that's showing you this is escalating, then you can do some things that are very simple. Like you can take a pause. Actually take a pause before you react in whatever way it's going to be, screaming or slamming the door or whatever it is, take a pause. And your pause can be that you're going to breathe and count to 10. Your pause can be that you're going to remove yourself from the situation. Whatever it is that works for you is something that can be quick and really helpful to just break that kind of cycle, break that pattern that you fall into. So a pause is an easy one that I like, and anyone can start with a pause, right? Just delay that a bit.
So now we've paused and we're able to gather our thoughts instead of
Yeah,
reacting,
right.
right? We choose to respond. What happens after that 10-second pause? What's the next step?
Well, I think when we take that pause, we need to start asking ourselves some things. How am I going to feel if I yell at this person? How am I going to feel tomorrow after after I've screamed at them or after I've said maybe some terrible things to them? Even if you're not yelling, it's not always yelling, but you have to ask yourself how you're going to feel. What is that going to be like? And hopefully that will help you to modify what you want to do, and say, okay, well, I'm going to feel awful. I always feel guilty. Okay, so what else can I do? Give myself another give myself another option, right? If I'm not going to do my go-to option, which I don't like, according to my values and who I want to become, what is another option?
So
So,
what I'm hearing is choosing the behavior instead of the automatic behavior choosing you,
right,
right? It's
yeah,
what we call governance in action, governing ourselves, where
hmm
we have our emotions and feelings in such tight regulation that they
yeah,
become a detriment to the system, including myself and others, versus a hindrance.
hmm
Now, this takes practice, right? Because the
oh yeah,
human beings were designed to automatically react, right? There's either the flight, fight, or freeze, right? So one of those is going to be the automatic response. So as you shared, Dr. Sandra, it's important to understand what the initial trigger is. What has been those habitual, repeatable patterns we've been exposed to that have caused trauma in us.
hmm
Now, can you talk about how we project our trauma onto others? So we make our stuff others.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways we do that. Our mind is then primed to pay attention to people and situations in a very specific way. If we think people, for instance, let's just go with that they dismiss us or dismiss our opinions, we're going to be hypersensitive to that. And for instance, if somebody looks distracted, we might interpret that as I'm not interesting or they don't want to hear me. Or if somebody, I don't know, has to leave early and we're in some kind of discussion or meeting, we might take that as them dismissing us. So our brains become primed to look for what we think is is happening either to us and to others, and then so we can start to frame situations that way. We can accuse other people, so we're projecting that onto them, onto their behaviors, and we're looking to validate what we think. Okay, because if we don't, it causes cognitive dissonance, and that's when what we think doesn't align with what's happening, and that's very uncomfortable. So if I think that people don't like me, I'm going to go look to confirm that, because evidence of the contrary is hard to make sense of, right? And then I have to break my cognitive distortion, my way of viewing the world, or my core beliefs. And for instance, maybe I think I'm unlikable. I have to break that belief. That's very hard. So I'm just going to find evidence that I'm unlikable. That's much easier because that's my belief, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to use myself as an example here. One of my core beliefs was that life has to be hard. Everything has to be a challenge, and that comes back from a whole bunch of childhood stuff. So as I started
Yeah.
to do work, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, I get that.
And as I started to do work on myself and develop, personal development journey, self awareness, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it, I started to get glimpses of peace and serenity. What would happen though, when I found that, my mind would go, that doesn't feel normal. Because normal for
Yeah.
me was chaos, life has to be hard. So I would self
Yeah.
consciously sabotage the peace
hmm
and serenity for what I knew to be normal.
Yes, absolutely. That so there's two things we do. We try to confirm like the self-fulfilling prophecy. We try to confirm what we think and kind of edit what we see so that it fits. or we are going to totally sabotage certain things or change whatever's happening to fit with what feels right and normal for us, and to our detriment often, unless we're able to kind of take that journey and figure out why we have certain core beliefs and views of ourselves, the world, and people, and then make that decision that we want that to be different. And then it's not easy. I might make it sound like taking a pause or whatever is easy. It's not, right? That's hard work.
Yeah, and I just like to add the fact that that we all come from parents and grandparents and great grandparents, and if you think about it, if you're a 12th generation family member, there was 4,095 people, 4,098 people that came ahead of you for you to be here today. So
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
includes 4,098 emotional traditions of ways of doing things emotionally. Like if we say, for example, there was disinterest or disengagement or lack of emotional connection, we've been taught that generationally. So
Right.
for those of us that are doing the work, it's important to realize that we have thousands of people of emotional behaviors that are impacting us how to want to
Mm-hmm.
change.
Mm-hmm.
So when we do the work, we can have the knowledge, which is the,
Yeah.
reading the book, listen to the podcast, have done some work. And it's important to have compassion on ourselves that this stuff is hardwired. Can you talk about that? That, the
Yeah.
how we can change neural pathways and neuroplasticity in the brain that's been hardwired for generations.
Yeah, I love that. It's so fascinating. It's sort of our ancestral psychiatry and the stories that we carry in our transcended and even trauma that can be shared from one past, from one generation to another, and often comes from a protective type of place of not wanting to repeat similar patterns or thinking certain things are dangerous, and then developing, world certain kind of perspective. And so it's so ingrained, sometimes we don't even realize why or what that is. And our brains, so the way we make connections stronger is through repetition. Think of it like a muscle, right? When you're working out a muscle, it gets stronger. You don't work it out, it doesn't get stronger. So an example that I love, when you say something like, "Can you tell me something you don't like about yourself?" to a group of people. Raise your hand. Hands go up in 2 seconds. Everybody can think of something they don't like about themselves. You know where this is going. And then when you say, okay, tell me something you like about yourself, that you really like about yourself, ooh, it takes a little bit more time and thought and effort. Why? Because we are reinforcing those connections. We are reinforcing things, when we think about things we don't like, or we are critical of ourselves, having, scrutinizing what we say, what we do, that becomes stronger in our brains. That connection becomes stronger. And so this is how, when we talk about that generational psychiatry and how world perspectives and views and behaviors are passed down, is through repetition. Repetition, and then the brain makes connections. So how do we undo that? How do we not undo, never going to undo it. How do you change it? Through micro habits, through, taking small, tiny steps, whatever they might be. If it's about, I don't know, emotional awareness. Okay, maybe you're not ready to talk about your feelings and your story, but can you journal about one thing every day, how you felt today? Are there little micro steps that you can take, that will start helping you make some of those changes, because they are connections and they become stronger in our brain, and we need to have new connections, right? Make new connections through new experiences, behaviors, and thinking.
And now through the study of epigenetics, there is proof that we
Right.
carry our parental and grandparents and our families past DNA. Sorry, our emotional scars, emotional traumas in our DNA,
Right. Yeah.
right? So we carry the shame that our parents and grandparents carried, and then we're trying to, then all we seek is shame because that's what we know. And we're trying to break the pattern of shame. It's incredibly hard.
Right. And I would say, even backing up and realizing that that is there for you is probably even harder, because you're in it. It's part of who you are. And some people don't even question if there, is something there that's disturbing them or their lives, or even that first awareness part is very difficult.
It's like asking the fish, Mr. Fish or Mrs. Fish, what's their water like? And the fish goes, what water? This is what's normal to me, right?
Yeah.
So, we're in the process of working on my sixth book, which is all around emotional traditions. Because what I notice in our practice with families of wealth is that they're so ingrained in these emotional traditions, positive and negative. The
Right.
positive ones create the wealth, the negative ones create the emotional disconnection that the wealth creates.
Yeah.
So we talked about the first piece is about really being honest with ourselves, and there's a chapter in the book called Hugging the Ugly. We have to, I'm of the belief that we have to hug our ugly. And the ugly is that part of us that we don't want to associate with. So in my case, it was shame. Shame was
Mhm,
my thing. It was my jam. Right. So
mhm.
I had to I had to first go, hey, friend, shame, there you are, my old friend. And then I had to hug shame in order to transform it. Can you expand on that from a psychological perspective, what that does when we acknowledge and make friends with it, and how that leads to transformation?
Yeah, we have to. So we need to make space for anything that we're feeling and thinking. So it has to exist. So we need to first let it exist. Some people don't even let it exist. Then become,
Allow it to be.
yeah, and then
Without
become
judging or
aware.
making it wrong, right?
Yeah, it's just there. It is what it is. This is teal. It is what it is, right? So my emotion is there and it is what it is, regardless of whether I like it or don't like it. So I guess what I'm trying to say then is removing judgment, right? So noticing that there's an emotion that lives inside of you that you can name, removing judgment, removing labels. Make room for it. Don't judge it. Don't try to control it. Don't try to do anything to it. Leave it alone. It's there. Okay. And so that's what we do, right? We're humans. We start judging, describing, trying to understand. Versus if we're observing and saying, I feel shame, I'm observing that. That is it. It is an emotion. It is maybe unpleasant for me, but it remains that it's an emotion. It's not doing anything to me. It's not controlling me. It's not causing anything other than it's there and it's allowed to be there. Right. And to make space for that, there's also a way through acceptance and commitment therapy. It's like a technique that you see and you can read about. Like you breathe into feelings, right? You breathe sort of in them, around them, you make room for them. And so in doing that, we're giving that emotion less control. And we're allowing it to exist, but we're not letting it hurt us or influence our behavior. We're just letting it be. And it's allowed to just be. There's nothing wrong with it being there, right? It's all of the thinking about what it is, what it means, and then how it's affecting our behavior that causes, sort of more of an issue, if you want to call it that. But yeah, letting them be. They can't hurt you. No matter how horrible it is, it can't hurt you. It's a feeling. You can tell yourself that, or it's a thought.
And I think the other thing from my own experience was I collapsed feeling shame into becoming shame. I am
Okay.
shameful. No, it's a
Right.
feeling that
Right.
it's a feeling that
Yeah,
I had because of something that happened to me. And
exactly.
actually it was I had to disconnect the two,
Right.
right? To give myself permission to acknowledge it and ultimately become friends with it, i.e., hug it and have
Hmm.
compassion for it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We aren't our emotions.
As Mick Nolte says in the movie Peaceful Warrior, emotions are like the weather, they pass,
They do.
right? What happens is human beings like to hang on to stuff. We like to hang on to good times and we like to hang on to bad times. And they
Yeah.
both are transitory, just as feelings are, right?
Hmm.
And what I have found is in working with clients is they want to hang on to the good emotions and they want to not face the negative emotions. It's
Ah,
about treating them the same.
right.
It's like
Right.
I've got my hand here and I've got this ugly little finger and I'm going to avoid it. No, there's a story behind this.
Mhm.
Right? Just like
Yeah.
the story behind, in my case, shame or abandonment, or whatever there is, and that's actually what I call is our superpower. Is once we hug it,
Right.
that's where we find our strength to become extraordinary.
Yeah, I agree. And what it made me think of is we're the ones placing the judgment to say this is a negative emotion or a positive emotion. It's just an emotion. And then from there, you figure out, what you want to do and what you want to influence. But we're judging it. We're deciding that it's bad and it shouldn't be there, or it's good and it should be there. And then you also made me think that sometimes we have this tendency to also want to over identify with the more difficult emotions because they're part of our identity. So for some people, they become part of our identity and become part of our worldview, right? And so that can be really harmful and detrimental to yourself, to others, to relationships. And if you're in that mode, you need to start recognizing what you're holding on to. Why is that part of your identity? Why is that important?
One of the things that we talk about in our coaching practice is we've got this, what I call our default identity, right?
Right.
And as
Yeah.
the greatest addiction any human has is to our identity. We hang on to that stuff and we'll fight for it, right? So there's three components in my view that make up our default identity: the lie we tell ourselves about ourselves, the lie we tell ourselves about ourselves in the context of relationships, and the lie we tell ourselves about ourselves in the context of money. Now,
Mm,
we hold these lies to be absolute truths, even though they're fundamental lies, but we'll
right.
fight for those lies. So, for example, the
Yes.
lie I told myself was that it's my fault. No matter what happens, it's my fault. The lie about myself in the context of relation was I'll be punished because it's my fault. The lie about money was that money allows me to fit in. And I used to run my life based on those lies. And in the
Mm,
work that we do is we help families and individuals design their identity. Just like we design a house, we design a
right.
wardrobe,
Yeah.
we can design our identity if we choose to.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, can you talk about the journey from a psychological perspective of the default identity to the design identity in simple steps that people can say, I can do this, this, and this, just at least start the journey? Because it's not, not going to listen to a podcast by Dr. Sandra, even though she's incredibly brilliant, is going to solve you. It's going to fix these lifetime of issues of
Oh boy.
4,098 people that contributed to World War. Okay.
Go back to values. I think that that's very important when we talk about how we want to live our lives, the relationships we want, what kind of experiences, emotions we want to have. We need to know what we value. And we have to ask those hard questions. What do I want my life to look like? When I feel most happy, I am doing what? When I feel most passionate or engaged, and it could be work, it could be relationships, what am I doing that leads to those emotions? How do I want my day to look like? Do we ever stop and ask ourselves, like, ideally, what's my day today? Do I like fast pace? Do I like being around people? Do I like new things? Do I like repetition?
Hmm.
Do I value relationships? What do I value, right? Like, is it my time? Is it relationships? Is it, things? I don't know. So figuring out what I value, how I want to live my life according to those values, and what person I want to show up as for myself and for others. And does that align? So I think first we need to figure out, take a big step back and see how we want to live and how we want to show up. And then from there, we really need to look at those micro steps. Like, what are some of the behaviors that bring me closer to some of those values? And how do I then change some of those small behaviors or things in my life to get closer to what I want to be, or who I want to be, how I want to live? Um, and I think in all of those decisions, we can always ask ourselves, is this consistent with who I want to be? Is this how I want to live? Right? Rather than being like on autopilot and just making decisions, well, it was always done like this, or I always did that. Why? Does this make me happy?
I think one of the things that we tend to forget when we talk about relationships is the longest relationship is the one we're going to have with ourselves. So,
Yeah.
if I may add to your point, which is absolutely brilliant, is what kind of relationship do I want to have with myself?
Hmm.
How do I want to
Yeah.
treat myself? Who do I want to become? What impact do I want to have? And then, who do I want to surround myself that's aligned with who I say I want to become?
Exactly. And that can have such a big influence who you associate with and your friends, and can have such a big influence on how you see yourself, what type of person you want to be, how you want to develop. What do they contribute? How do they contribute to that positively? And one of the biggest things we lack in ourselves, and high achievers, high performers, very common, is, you had touched on it before, but self-compassion.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what happens to the human brain when they start to apply two simple concepts: gratitude and compassion.
Oh, yes. Okay. So those are so easy and so important because they can just be broken down into very small ways, acts of being compassionate towards ourselves and expressing gratitude. That's where we see influences on depression, anxiety, stress, connectedness. Like by practicing things as simple as expressing gratitude, being compassionate towards yourself, you can mitigate things like burnout, depression, stress. There are lots of very positive benefits on how that influences our bodies and our brains through very simple practices.
And gratitude doesn't have to be for the big, grandiose things. It's simple, like I'm
Oh,
able to get out of bed.
yeah.
I'm breathing this morning.
Hmm.
Gratitude for the cup of coffee. Gratitude for the garden.
Yeah.
Gratitude for the sun. Gratitude for the rain.
Absolutely. It can be very small things. It can be done regularly, or it can be done, when you think about it, or you can plan to do it. But it's being appreciative of everything that you experience that is positive for you in your life, even if it is something really small, like you're really enjoying your coffee. I'm grateful to have this coffee, or, this beautiful day, or this great discussion.
And I go back to what you talked about, the ego, the mind seeks proof
Yeah.
what it believes to be true. So if we shift the focus to gratitude and we change the focus, we attract more of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then it becomes easier and those connections become stronger as well in the brain. So, like your muscles, as they become stronger, right? So, it'll be more natural and it'll be easier to keep doing it the more you practice it.
So, Dr. Sandra, we've come to the top of the show in amazingly record time, as I knew we would. Like, what a rich conversation. So much there. So, as you know, I always like to end the show asking my guests, what's one piece of advice you can offer the current generation and or the next generation based on the conversation we had?
Yeah, I think what pops out comes to mind right away is around compassion, self-compassion and loving yourself. And it's in good days, bad days, things you've done well, things you've done badly, to love yourself more when you're going through a hard time or you've done something that's not so great, to not fall into shame. Love all parts of yourself and all, whatever they are, mistakes, anything that you do, with the idea of then saying, okay, well, where do I go from here? Right? We can only change and work on what we see or what we're aware of. And the best way to do that is by being compassionate towards ourselves and allowing ourselves to exist and make those mistakes and show up the way we're showing up and then have an impact on it.
Dr. Sandra, always a pleasure and a privilege and rich, rich, rich wisdom and just thank you for being you and volunteering your time for the listeners. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So if listeners wanted to find you, learn more about you, where do they go about finding you?
Probably LinkedIn is easiest. You can
Okay.
find me there. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Sandra, again, thank you once again. What an amazing conversation. And listeners, as you know, our guests donate their time, they donate their wisdom because they care. They care about you and they recognize that being you is a difficult and at times lonely place. And we just want to create this community that you're not alone in what you're going through. And there's always folks that can assist and are here to serve you. So, Dr. Sandra, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And listeners, as you know, part of being grateful is sharing. Share the podcast with your friends, share your thoughts, share your comments with us so we can, know how to serve you more. Dr. Sandra, thank you so much again.
Thank you.